How's everybody doing? Today we are going to look at the next set in this series, which is Visions. Visions was released in February of 1997 and is the third set in the Mirage block. Part of the reason I'm making these videos is because I'm trying to become better at evaluating collections. When I'm looking at Magic the Gathering collections, I want to know which cards from all the sets in Magic the Gathering's history which are notable. And I figured while I do this, why not also share this information with the world while also reinforcing it in my own head by making these slides. So let's get right into it today. So dig up your old Magic the Gathering collection and see if you have any of these cards. The first one on the list is Necromancy at number 10. It's a very horrifying little card with also a horrifying amount of text on the card. But let's just walk through it together. So it's a 2 mana, 1 black, so 3 casting cost enchantment. And it reads, when you play Necromancy, choose target creature card in any graveyard. When Necromancy comes into play, put that creature into play as though it were just played, and Necromancy becomes a creature enchantment that targets the creature. If Necromancy leaves play, bury the creature. So that would be sacrifice the creature nowadays. So to simplify, you play Necromancy, return a creature in any graveyard to the battlefield, attach Necromancy to that creature, and if Necromancy dies, the creature dies too. Hopefully that simplifies it a little bit. And the other effect that it has is that you can choose to play it as an instant, and if you do, you have to sacrifice it at the end of the turn. So it allows you to kind of, just a little bit more versatility and utility to the card, that you can play it, for example, in response to your opponent attacking you, and have kind of a surprise creature from the graveyard. But then the drawback is you have to sacrifice it at the end of the turn. So, you'd hope that the Oracle text would have simplified. Is that readable? No, it's probably too small on the camera. It doesn't matter. This is way too much text. It's so ridiculous. I can't believe how convoluted it managed to be in the Oracle text version of the card. Yeah. So unfortunately, you can use it. I was talking about this in my top 10 most expensive cards in Mirage video, that there was a card in that video which was instant speed and could reanimate creatures, but the difference between that card, it's called Shallow Grave, and this card was that card gave the creature haste, whereas this doesn't. So unfortunately, although you could reanimate the Eldrazi Titans and Worldspine Wurm with Necromancy, it wouldn't have haste unless you give it haste, and so it would just die at the end of the turn without being able to attack. Nonetheless, this is a $9 card, and it is a uncommon, so that's a pretty good price for a card that is just an uncommon, and maybe if you played back then, you might have a few copies of this card, so definitely something to look out for. At number 9 on the list, we have Undiscovered Paradise. This is a reserve list rare, and you'll see that I included a little star next to the number, and the little star means that it is a reserve list rare. So it is a land, and you can tap it for 1 mana of any color, but at the beginning of your next untap phase, after using that ability, you have to return it to your hand. So, I mean, this is good and bad. It's mostly a drawback, but there are some ways that you can use it advantageously. I've heard that this is just kind of used as another multicolored land for dredge decks, but it could be used in a dredge Bloodghast deck, because Bloodghast is a creature that comes back from the graveyard whenever you play a land, and this card just kind of guarantees you a land drop every turn. So that could be one effect, and just in general landfall decks it could be good in. But generally speaking, I do think it's a little bit overcosted right now. It's around $13, and I think that's partially due to, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, to reserve list speculators who seem to be just thinking that any reserve list rare that's a land is therefore a good buy. There's a similar case to this happening if you watch my top 10 most expensive cards in Mirage. The card Teferi's Isle also seemed a little bit overcosted for what it did. At least this one is a lot more of a decent card than Teferi's Isle, but still. If you can see here on the price chart, it recently just shot up, which was probably a buyout. I don't know if this is visible on the camera. Hopefully you can kind of see here that there was relatively stable, and it kind of got bought out and then bought out again. So, just something to note. Ephemerith Enchantress is number 8 on the list, another reserve list rare. And let's walk through this card. So 1 green, 1 white for 2 mana. You get a 1/2 with the ability that whenever an enchantment is put into a graveyard from play, you can draw a card. So very interesting. The other enchantresses are usually when you cast an enchantment, you get to draw a card, such as, I think, Verduran Enchantress, Mesa Enchantress, and Argothian Enchantress are the other three. So this is a really interesting, different effect, and it definitely does have its uses. Something cool to note is that it's any graveyard, it's not just your own. So if you destroy one of your opponent's enchantments with a Naturalize, Crow's Egg Grip, doesn't matter, then you also get to draw a card, which is really cool, kind of unexpected. Yeah, what card doesn't combo with Enchanted Evening? So one thing you can do with Femorith Enchantress, which you can't do with any of the other enchantresses, is play Enchanted Evening and then play any type of board wipe, you know, whether it's Wrath of God to destroy all creatures, or Armageddon even to destroy all lands, and you're going to draw a crap ton of cards from doing such a thing. Another interesting, I guess another use for it would just be just in a general enchantment deck, to run this card as kind of an insurance measure, that if one of your opponents plays, say, Back to Nature or anything that destroys all enchantments, then you get to draw a bunch of cards to rebuild your board state. Similarly to the last card we were looking at, it has recently experienced a very large price spike and was around a $3 to $5 card before, I think just back in April, and it looks like it was just a $3 to $5 card. So another, you know, just to know, just something to know, right? And it looks like the price might still be settling out. It might stay at this price. There's really no telling at this point. Nobody can know the future of Magic the Gathering card prices. And this card will cost you about $15 at the time of making this video. At number 7, this card, in my opinion, at least, is a little bit more deserving of its spot on the list. Retribution of the Meek. For only 2 colorless and 1 white, for 3 casting costs, this sorcery will destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater, and they can't be regenerated. It says bury all creatures. That was an old term that's now been errated to say destroy without chance of regeneration. But I think this is very, very powerful in the right deck. And so you can imagine if you're playing a deck where most of your creatures are below 4 power, then you can essentially, in some cases, have a one-sided board wipe for 3 mana. It's very splashable, you know, unlike Wrath of God, which I believe is 2 white mana. This is only 1, so it's easier to put in multicolored decks. And I think it would be especially effective in a commander deck where the general has power 3 or less. Yeah, a lot of these cards have had recent price spikes. I'm not going to include a graph for every single card because there's just so many of them have had recent price spikes, but this one is included, although I think, in my personal opinion, this one is worth its weight a little bit more than the others. Not saying that they're bad, but I do think this one is very good and has a really good spot in commander decks, and this card will cost you about $15. So, at number 6, we have Tithe. This is a really cool one. For 1 white mana, at instant speed, you can search your library for a plains, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library, or if any target opponent controls more lands than you, or I guess it's worded as if you control fewer lands than target opponent, you can search your library for 2 plains instead. So for 1 white mana, you're getting 2 cards. That's pretty good. Unfortunately, it's a little bit outclassed by its distant cousin Land Tax, which will get you 3 lands every turn that you have less lands than an opponent, and it stays on the battlefield as an enchantment. But just because this card exists and is arguably better doesn't mean that Tithe isn't also very, very good. And an interesting use as well of Tithe is that you can specifically find a plains, whereas with land tax you find only basic lands. So this can be used to find non-basic lands, which are better than basics, like Scrubland, for example, or useful non-basics like Mistveiled Plains, because they do have the plains subtype, which is what the card looks for instead of basic lands. And one of these will cost you about $16, and the price trend for this one does look more stable than the other ones. Doesn't look like it's only worth its money because of a recent buyout. At least that's what the price charts show. At number 5, another reserve list rare, we have Anvil of Bogarden. It is a 2 mana artifact, and it reads, each player skips his or her discard phase, which has been errated to players have no maximum hand size. During each player's draw phase, that player draws an additional card and then chooses and discards a card. Pretty interesting. It's like a Howling Mine, but doesn't generate card advantage. It's like a howling looter or something. So one combo with this card is with Chains of Mephistopheles. This is a very convoluted card. Should I even bother trying to explain it? But basically, I'm just going to summarize it, just a simplified version, because I don't want this video to be too long. With Chains and Anvil of Bogarden, you essentially create a situation where players are drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards every turn, so the net gain in cards is 0. So it could create a really effective lockout for decks that want to win the game slowly and lock out their opponents, essentially. It does lock you out as well, but it does create a very effective lock, in my opinion. And also works with Leovold, Emissary of Trest, which reads that each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. So essentially what would happen is you would draw 1 card for turn, you draw another one, or you try to draw another one with Anvil of Bogarden. You couldn't, but you'd still have to discard one, so you discard the one you drew, or a different card in your hand. Once again, you wouldn't gain any cards, it would be net 0, so to speak. Unfortunately though, Leovold is banned in Commander, and Chains of Mephistopheles is over $1,000, so might be a little bit hard to get those 2 cards to work together, but interesting nonetheless. They also just generally work well, Anvil of Bogarden also just generally works well with cards that check when your opponents discard cards. So like Megrim, for example, deals 2 damage to opponents when they discard, which they'll be doing every turn because of Anvil of Bogarden's effect. Waste Not, which has a different effect depending on which cards your opponents discard, which is advantageous to you. Or cards that trigger whenever an opponent draws a card. So like Underworld Dreams does 1 damage to your opponents every time they draw, or Nekusar the Mindraiser, somewhat decently popular EDH general from the Commander 2013 set, which also deals 1 damage to an opponent every time they draw a card. And Anvil of Bogarden costs around $16 as of making of this video. At number 4, we have, surprisingly, not a reserve list rare. Still a rare, but it's not on the reserve list. Probably would be more expensive if it was on the reserve list. Has been reprinted a few times. So for 2 colorless and 2 green, for a total casting cost of 4, it is a sorcery which allows you to sacrifice a green creature to search your library for any green creature and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle your library. So this one is just a lot more obvious, not much that I need to explain. You can play it, sacrifice a 0/1 plant token from Colony Garden, and find something ridiculous like Progenitus, for example. A 10/10 protection from everything. So technically, it's green, it's got the green mana symbols, so it works for natural order, but yeah, so really easy to abuse, just very powerful card in general, and these will cost you about $18. Getting up there, almost at 20 bucks. So at number 3, we have City of Solitude. Another reserve list rare. This is a green enchantment for 2 colorless, 1 green, 3 casting cost, and it's a very simple ability. Each player may play spells and activate abilities only during his or her turn. So basically, completely nerfing counterspells. So you basically don't have to worry about counterspells after you play this card. I know this card is in a lot of sideboards. It's a very common sideboard card, especially for combo decks that need to combo off without any interference from their opponent. And another really interesting thing, it stops players, this is according to the official rulings on the Gatherer, stops players from activating mana abilities. So that means nobody can even tap their lands for mana during your turn, or during another player's turn, which is, I thought that was really cool, and I was reading some people talking about it and did some extra research too, and I found a bunch of cards that you could abuse knowing this, that players can't activate mana abilities. So here's just a few that I found for this video. Scarwood Bandits has an ability that allows you to take control of an opponent's artifact unless they pay 2 colorless mana for as long as you control the bandits. And obviously with the City of Solitude out, they won't be able to pay that mana, so you get the artifact no matter what. Rhystic Tutor just allows you to have another demonic tutor for 1 extra colorless. Normally it would only go off if no opponent paid 2 colorless mana, but with City of Solitude they can't, so you get the card guaranteed. Tariff, this is a really interesting one. Each player chooses a creature with the highest total casting cost he or she controls, then pays an amount of mana equal to that creature's total casting cost, or sacrifices the creature. So for only one colorless and one white, you get a card which will destroy all of the highest casting cost creatures of all your opponents, while letting you be the only one that can actually pay the tariff, that can actually pay the cost of your most expensive creature to keep it. But what's really interesting is that it makes them sacrifice the creature, so it gets around indestructibility, regeneration, and it's non-targeted. And non-targeted removal is pretty rare, so that means if the creatures have Shroud, Hexproof, which is very common in Commander, it's they're not going to be able to do anything against Tariff, which is so even Emrakul, it can even destroy an Emrakul, even an Emrakul with Shroud doesn't matter. And then possibly the most game-breaking combo with City of Solitude is Fade Away. So for 2 colorless, 1 blue, it is a sorcery that for each creature, that creature's controller pays 1 colorless mana or sacrifices a permanent. So it's already a pretty decent card on its own, but you can play this, you can pay the colorless mana for all of your creatures, your opponents can't, so that means for every creature they control, they have to sacrifice a permanent. So that could be absolutely devastating, especially against creature-heavy builds. This could be an absolute table turner for EDH Commander games. It could absolutely devastate your opponents. And then one last combo, because I kind of went overboard with this, is War Cadence. So for 2 colorless, 1 red is an enchantment that you can pay X and 1 red so that creatures can't block unless their controller pays X colorless mana for each blocking creature. So since they can't pay any colorless mana because of City of Solitude's effect, that means that for 2 mana each turn, your entire army is unblockable, which I thought was pretty sweet, and definitely had to include that. So City of Solitude, at the time of making this video, will cost you about $20. Finally hit it, the $20 range. At number 2, and very deserving, in my opinion, of its spot, is Squandered Resources. This is just a card that is just begging to be comboed. Let me read it to you. So 1 black and 1 green. So for 2 mana is an enchantment. You can sacrifice a land to add to your mana pool 1 mana of any type the sacrificed land could produce. So the intended effect of this is that, or the intended use when they made the card, I'm assuming anyway, was that you play Squandered Resources, and then at some point in the future, you can kind of go all out and double your mana for a turn. So let's say you have 4 lands or 5 lands, you tap all 5 for mana, and you also sacrifice all 5, and then you get 10 mana for 1 turn, but you don't have lands anymore. So it's like that trade-off, right? But it ended up having some really interesting combo potential, especially in its day. Pro Tour player Mike Long had a really famous combo deck called Prosperous Bloom. I'm not going to get into the details of that. I talked about it a little bit more in my top 10 most expensive cards in Mirage video, so check that out if you want to hear a bit more about what the deck was about. But in general, the main sort of combo that you can use, and which Mike Long and other players used at the time, was with a card called Natural Balance. So for 2 colorless and 2 green, this is a 4 mana sorcery, and I'll read it to you and I'll explain because it's a little bit convoluted, but each player controlling 6 or more lands sacrifices enough lands to reduce his or her land total to 5. But the important part is, each player controlling 4 or fewer lands may search his or her library for enough basic lands to bring his or her land total to 5, put those lands into play, and then shuffle their library. So what happens, basically what you can do is sacrifice, let's say you have 5 lands, you sacrifice all 5 lands to Squandered Resources after tapping them. So you get 5 from tapping, 5 from sacrificing them all, you're at 10 mana, then you play Natural Balance, brings you down to 6 mana. And what's great about it is all the basic lands come into play untapped. So because of Squandered Resources, because you sacrifice them all, you now have no lands. Natural Balance checks and goes, oh, this player has 0 lands, so you get to search for 5 basic lands. You put them all into play untapped, and then you can tap them all again and sacrifice them all again to Squandered Resources. So you'd get 10, you pay 4, you go down to 6, and then you get 10 more mana. So you get 16 mana total off 5 lands from this 2-card combo, and essentially would be a net gain of 6 mana for every copy of Natural Balance that you play with Squandered Resources. as well as also thinning your deck out, which was a really important function of these two cards in the Prosperous Bloom combo deck. And this card will cost you about $20 at the making of this video. So similar to City of Solitude. It's a bit of a difficult string of words to say there, a lot of S's. At number 1, drumroll please, we have Vampiric Tutors. Surprisingly also, like Natural Order, not a reserve list rare, although it is a rare. So let me just read it to you. And this card is pretty self-explanatory why it's really awesome. It's 1 black mana for an instant. You can search your library for a card, shuffle your library, put the card on top of it, and you lose 2 life. I mean, losing 2 life is nothing when you consider the fact that you get to find literally any card in your deck for 1 mana. I mean, that is just, that's just obviously super good. So, how much do you guess this card will cost? If you don't know, only if you don't know how much it'll cost. Try and guess how much it costs in 2018. As a comparison to Demonic Tutor, I know there's been a debate for a while as to which card is better, Demonic Tutor or Vampiric Tutor. Just to compare and contrast a little bit, Demonic Tutor is 2 mana instead of 1. It's a sorcery instead of an instant, so those are 2 advantages for Vampiric Tutor over Demonic Tutor. However, Vampiric Tutor makes you pay 2 life, which is a disadvantage, and the card goes on top of your deck instead of into your hand, which is another disadvantage. But one interesting interaction with Vampiric Tutor, which you can't do with Demonic Tutor, which I didn't even realize until I made this video, is miracle cards. So this would be the same thing for Mystical Tutor, is you can... Basically, miracle cards are cards that you want on the top of your deck, because if you draw them, then... Yeah, if it's the first card you drew in the turn, then you can cast it for a much reduced price and get a super powerful effect. So, there's a couple of examples in Treat the Angels and Bonfire of the Damned. So I thought that was a very interesting interaction with Vampiric Tutor, but nonetheless, is a $50 card at the most expensive card currently in the Visions expansion of 1997. So if you have one of these puppies, you could trade it in exchange for taking your spouse out to a restaurant. I don't know, like whatever your imagination could think of that $50 could do. Or you could keep it and use it in your decks. But last but not least, was there anything I missed? I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Is there any interesting facts about any of these cards that I didn't talk about? Was there anything you disagree with? Definitely let me know in the comments. Do you have any speculations about which cards you think are going to go up or down in value in the future? Which cards you think are not going to hold their weight? Which cards maybe you think are not on this list but might be on this list in the future because they're really awesome and just undiscovered? Definitely let me know. Really curious to hear. Always wanting to learn more about Magic's history and whatnot. And that about concludes the video. So thanks for watching. Do subscribe if you want to see more of these. I'll probably make more of these. And I'll see you in the next video.